Hi, everybody. It's great to see you. Really thrilled that you're able to come to our panel. Welcome to the summit and welcome to Halifax. My name is Alexandra Flynn, and I have the pleasure of facilitating a panel full of amazing humans who are going to be coming up here in a moment, and I'll introduce in a moment. But first, I want to acknowledge where we are. We are on Mi'kma'ki territory. As you already heard from Nat previously, the fact that we're on this land and that we're all um, given the welcome to be a part of the history and the governance and the future of what takes place on land is such a privilege. It's such an honor. And I know that we all are reflecting on that and know that already from the beautiful welcome that we received today. But I also just want to take a moment to talk about the Wabanaki Confederacy and the agreement that we have, not just to know about whose lands these are, but to remember that we are part of a truth and friendship pact that extends from before to the forever future, and that this is an agreement that that we forget about too often, or certainly our leaders forget about too often. That this is law. I'm a law professor, and when I went to law school, we didn't learn about treaties like this one as being part of our legal structures and our legal orders, but they are part of our legal orders. And as time goes on and courts become more and more willing to stand up, as they were a couple weeks ago with a new decision coming out of Coast Salish territories, where I come from, on the fact that there's Aboriginal title and it exists and it is part of our legal system, the more that these truths, these laws are ones that will not just be something that we say as a land acknowledgement, but are the things that we're bound by. All of us are bound by, our leaders are bound by, and that we have to follow. And I'm not as familiar with these particular lands, the lands of the Mi'kma'ki, but I am familiar with their bravery and their fortitude at standing up for what is right over and over and over and over again, as they are doing right now. It is such an honor, truly, to be here to talk about community land trusts. I am one of the many people who you'll meet over the course of the next couple of days, if you're not already part of this network or you haven't met us already, called the Balanced Supply of Housing. And this is a collaborative research network that is run out of the University of British Columbia, where I'm a professor. But the important thing about it is that it is a network of researchers and community-based partners. The issues that we study, the focus of our work, is very much drawn from the people who are doing the work on the ground. The academics who are involved are not the ones who are front and center of this work. It's very much driven through this collaboration. And for the other researchers that are in the room who are part of the network or who do their own research, you'll know how key that is to be grounded and led by those who are in community, who are facing the actual challenges and know the realities of what's taking place. So far, our network has funded over 40 projects. Our work looks at land supply in 3 major cities, in Montreal, Vancouver, and in Toronto. But of course, this work applies across Turtle Island. And our 3 areas of research focus on innovating in responsive land practices, reshaping the financialization of housing, and designing sustainable housing futures. And through this work, which began in 2019, just before the pandemic affected us all, we decided that we were going to focus to a great extent on community land trusts. And that decision was made to a large extent because of the community partners who were part of our network, but also because of the vision and leadership of one of our academic partners, Sue Bunce from the University of Toronto. And so we decided a couple of years into the project to create a report and profile series that would deep dive into community land trusts. And so I just want to spend a couple of seconds, and I've already sped ahead, just outlining some of the reports that we have published. And there's a QR code so you can access all of the reports that are available on our website. The first one looks at CLT definitions. What are the legal meanings of CLTs across Canada? As those of you who work, can I just see a show of hands of those who work directly in creating or administering CLTs? Okay, so I don't have to tell you, every legal structure is different across the country. It's kind of a grab bag of choices. This report basically just affirms that. We have another report called Reclaim and Remain, which is co-authored by Nat Pace and Jane O'Brien Davis. And this report looks at the roots of CLTs, which are very much about community. It puts the community in CLTs and describes where that root comes from, but also why it's so essential to the ultimate structures that are created. A third report is called Responses and Resistance to Gentrification, and this one is authored by Susanna Bunce and Emma Esven. And this talks specifically about gentrification and how community land trusts relate to gentrification, how that relationship with other parts of community are animated through the creation of CLTs. Penny Gerstein authored a paper called Community Land Trust Foundation of British Columbia, which looks at that specific CLT. And then Maggie Lowe and Tiana Lewis wrote a report called More Than Just Affordable Housing, which is, you're going to hear more from Maggie when she comes up on the panel, so I won't talk about it too much. And similarly, a paper from A Case for Community Land Trusts in Canada, authored by Kuni Kamazaki. So I welcome you to use the QR code to read each of the reports. But importantly today, we're going to hear from different community-based and academic researchers who are part of the balanced supply of housing. And I'm just going to take a couple of seconds to introduce them as they come up to join me here on the panel. So Chi Tam is the managing director of the Toronto Chinatown Land Trust. She is an urban planner and anti-displacement organizer practicing in Toronto's Kensington Chinatown neighborhood. She's also a visiting expert with the School of Cities as an early career Canadian urban leader. She has been an active researcher with the Balanced Supply of Housing, where she's working to document community ownership models in Chinatown. By the way, I'm forcing them to come up in the panel like this. So this is just to give them the moment in the spotlight that they rightly deserve. Dominique Russell is the co-director of the Kensington Market CLT and has worked closely with the Balanced Supply of Housing and this network, the CNCLT, to oversee the report series that I just introduced previously. She's a local Kensington resident and also a writer, an activist, a teacher. If you haven't learned from Dominique before, I hope you have the opportunity to do so. She has so much knowledge. It's unbelievable. Before becoming CMCLT's co-director, she acted as a board co-chair since its incorporation in 2017. Josh Bart is the senior manager of the development strategy at the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust, also an amazing teacher and walking tour provider if you're in Toronto. Josh has been involved with the BSH since it was first funded in 2019 and has served on the Central Coordinating Committee. He has played a central role with Dr. Susanna Bunce to advocate for the CLT report series. He continues to work to build capacity in the CLT sector in Toronto and increasingly in Canada. You'll also hear from him on Sunday if you join that deep dive into governance. So please welcome Josh. Dr. Kuni Kamikaze is an assistant professor at UBC's School of Community and Regional Planning. Before coming to UBC, Kuni studied at the University of Toronto, where he worked closely with the Parkdale Neighbourhood Land Trust and the CLT sector in Toronto. He is bringing this experience to help CLTs develop in Vancouver, doing amazing work with the network there. And his recent report provides evidence of the important work that CLTs are doing across Canada to steward land and to protect affordable housing. So welcome, Kuni. And last but very much not least, Dr. Maggie Lowe is an assistant professor at UBC's School of Community and Regional Planning. Maggie is also the co-chair of the Indigenous Community Planning Program at SCARP. She is in addition to all of the work that she does at the university, she is a prolific writer, including the report that I outlined with Tiana Lewis, and she's an essential partner in looking at the Indigenous role in urban centers when it comes to affordable housing in community, including in community land trusts. So thank you all so much for joining. We're so happy to have you here today. Yay. Okay, so I'm going to start with Josh and Kuni. So you were both involved in the Parkdale Tower rental study, which was a follow-up to the really one of the first of its kind of deep dives into the Parkdale rooming house study. This is really taking you back in time, but I'm wondering if you can tell us about that report and the role that research plays in the work that has been done in Parkdale, and why these reports and why research continues to be such an essential part of the work that you do. And Josh, I'm going to give you the click in case you need to.
So Kuni's going to actually speak first because some of you may know, but some of you may not. Kuni Kamikaze has played a central role in supporting the initiation of the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust, Kensington Market Community Land Trust, has supported in different ways. Chinatown Community Land Trust is now supporting Downtown Eastside Community Land Trust. As an academic, well, as a planner and an academic ally, and so has informed how our organization has gotten involved in research and why we do it. So I want actually to invite Kuni to talk about, why he thought initially that research would be critical to the emergence of community land trusts and our strategies.
Thank you, Josh. I thought you were just going to give me a mic, so I didn't expect. We do research for organizing. Can I actually still say we? Okay. Sorry, I'm not working directly with PNLT these days. So we do research for organizing, and we do research for community-based planning. So it's not just, doing a kind of academic research, right? Just thinking about, how we can use the process of research to engage community members, residents, and stakeholders in thinking about what's happening in a neighborhood and what can we do about it, right? So it's really critical for us to think about, how we can build collective understanding of what's happening and what's the problems. And so that we can sort of, try to think about the action based on the people's experience. And for PNLT, it's been one of the key challenges is, displacement and gentrifications. And when we talk about gentrifications, it's sometimes gentrification is seen as some natural outcomes of the market forces. And people sometimes think that way too, right? Gentrification is inevitable because it's a market forces. But with the research, we can expose, concrete practices and policy issues behind those processes of gentrifications. And then the research really helps expose that. So the research is also about, finding a collective understanding of what's happening, but also more importantly, try to think about what kind of alternative vision we can have beyond the gentrifications. What other strategies that we can get together and act on it together, and what people get excited about being part of. So for the research, for PNLT, the research has been about linking the transformative demands that's coming out of the communities with strategies the policy solution that a PNLT can take. So I think that's the basis of the research project that we do.
Sick. Isn't Cooney awesome?
Woo!
Thanks, Cooney. Yeah, so we've grounded our work in community action research, identifying and testing solutions to the challenges that our community faces. At the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust, based on sort of Cooney's encouragement and support, we did our first community action research project back in 2017. We had a crisis in our community of very low-income individuals living in rooming houses being priced out, evicted, pushed out, in some cases in very violent ways out of their housing. We knew it was a problem, but we didn't know how big the problem was, and we didn't know necessarily how to respond. So we started with research, and we hired a planner, and we hired rooming house tenants to go out and explore the issue, going to every building in the neighborhood. And so first we try to name the problem. We want to know the problem really well. We want to be the experts on the problem, actually. I love the quote here, like, research is an organized and systemic way to get answers to questions for social change. That's how we approach it. So we learned a lot about this the sub-market of rooming houses and how we were losing these rooming houses. And in fact, these rooming houses were a critical form of affordable housing in our community that was being lost. There was no public policy to protect it, even though there were more affordable rooming house units than any other form of housing in our community that was affordable. So we knew we needed a solution. We wanted to preserve these rooming houses by buying them and bringing into the land trust, but there was no policy that would support that. Again, there was no policy that would preserve this housing as affordable, so there was a gap. Research enabled us to sort of identify that gap. We used the research to push for policy change, both policy that now protects dwelling rooms when there is a renovation or construction from being eliminated. Now there's policy protecting that, but also policy that allows our organization and other organizations like us to acquire and preserve these buildings. So research is a tool to also push for policy change that we need to implement the housing solutions that we know our communities need. Building off of that research and that experience of having success, doing our research with our community members and seeing some policy change and being able to actually act on the solutions that we identified through the research by preserving a few rooming houses, we decided that we needed to also explore what was happening in the larger rental buildings in our community. And through Balanced Supply of Housing, we had the opportunity. Tendon Dontak-Sam was our community-based research coordinator for that project. Tendon, do you want to stand up just so people can see you? Tendon led a team of community-based researchers, tenants, tenant organizers, tenant leaders, and academics to go into the large apartment buildings and talk to tenants about what they're experiencing. We mapped out ownership, and we realized that there was an increasing monopolization of ownership of these larger rental buildings by the corporate landlords and REITs that, at that point of the study, they owned over 50% of the rental units in Parkdale. So we're like, oh shit, and this was changing fast. And we were able to document that the tenants in the buildings owned by these landlords were having a higher prevalence of very negative experiences, harassment, evictions, lack of repair for low rent units, etc. And so we realized we needed a similar kind of response in these larger buildings as we needed in the smaller buildings. And so we've done the same thing. We've used our research to push for enabling policy and to try to implement our housing solutions. When we did the rooming house study, we were successful in getting a municipal acquisitions program created, but it was limited to small buildings because initially we asked for funding to buy small buildings. And then when we started to realize, through the research, we could prove that the same experience was being experienced by tenants in the larger buildings, and we needed the same solution in the larger buildings. So we began to advocate at the city that they expand the program to be able to support the acquisition of larger buildings. And we also even went to the feds to encourage them to also contribute to this housing solution on a policy basis. And I want to just report that research has impact if community uses it to get the policies and the programs that they need to do what they know will help with the issues their communities are facing. And what we've seen is that we fought to get funding, that policy change, so that our small organization, the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust, could preserve housing, and we've been doing that. We've preserved many buildings. What we didn't expect was that the enabling policy would allow for collective impact. So by the end of this year, we're going to have had over 8 organizations like us, other nonprofits in our community, not just us, but buy rental buildings and preserve them in our community By the end of the year, 500 units will have been preserved in our community since the program was created from that research. So, you know, the enabling policy helps you and your organization do your good work. But when we change policy, we also help our neighbors, the other organizations who might want to also put their efforts behind us, do that, and even other communities do that. And I just want to end by saying I think we have a historic opportunity. I talked about actually, we'll stop. I said enough. Okay, I'll say it. I'll say it. Everyone who knows me and how I'm obsessed with acquisitions will not be surprised by this. But we've been advocating that we preserve our existing rental because that's where people are currently living, and you know, ensuring people can stay in their housing at rates that they can afford is just like the first fight to win. And for a long time, the market was going crazy. And you know, there was no funding for acquisitions, but also just rents were going up and the value of these properties were going up, and it was overwhelming. We are in a weird moment right now, and there's some funding for acquisitions. There needs to be much more, but there's also this historic opportunity where these big companies who swallowed up our neighborhoods, they're not making the money they thought they were going to make, and some of them want to get out. And I just wanted to end by saying, like, I think we can win. If we can get the policies expanded to be able to afford these portfolios, I think these fuckers will sell them. And it makes me nauseous to think about how much money we're giving them, that we're giving them a way out of their stupid investments. But it's worth it because our neighbors, you know, our family members, they live in these buildings and they deserve to have that affordable housing. But I think we have the opportunity to win, but we have to get that policy change and we have to go after these buildings. And like, just to give you an example, right now there's a deal in our neighborhood, 3,000 units coming from one landlord that's available if the government would fund it, right? 3,000 units, can you imagine? 3,000 households. That's probably what, like 9,000, maybe 10, 12,000 people, right? Who could benefit, but we need the government to support it. But policy can help with that, or sorry, research can help enable that.
Thank you so much, Josh and Cooney. And it's true, right? It's like every step matters, right? The organizing, the community, the policy, the local change, the national change, it all matters. And that's definitely what we're seeing coming out of the research that's taking place in Parkdale. It's very inspiring. Dominique, I'm going to turn to you to talk about the work that you're doing at the Kensington Market Community Land Trust. So you recently made, the Community Land Trust recently made some acquisitions, 2 acquisitions, which is awesome. Congratulations. And now owns 3 buildings. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about what happens when you get the buildings. So you take over management of these new CLTs. What are some of the things that you wish you had known, or the CLT wishes it had known, after the dust settled and they were in your hands?
I possibly the first thing to respond to that is to say, well, I'm sort of glad we didn't know as much. But it recently thinking about it, it's really getting into good trouble. So it's trouble of all different kinds each time, but it is good and important trouble to get into. I want to start by saying the acquisition side of things is really my co-director, Zach Bradley, who might be here. See back here? No. So how do we, what we do as a land trust is look after one another and collectively look after a place. And so when we get a building, and I'll say our first acquisition we're very lucky in that it was relatively easy. We knew the tenants because we had fought with them side by side to prevent their displacement. It's a stable building. And so this, our first acquisition was 5456 Kensington Ave. It's a punk building. I wish I had a photo, but anyway, you can look it up. we're the Mona Lisa building, which we're currently we're just about to bring the original artist back and redo the mural that really identifies that building. But so 12 units of residential and 5 commercial units there. I'll say that one of the first things that we did, and she was involved in this, there were 13 units, except one of them was just totally illegal and like not really habitable. So that was one of the first things that we did. But we get to know our tenants. I mean, in this case, we knew our tenants, sort of just work to get the building better. And that can be huge challenge and finding the funding and making that happen. But when we buy a building, we bring those tenants into our membership. And so the organization will change and transform as those voices come to the table and stronger in our community. What I wish I had known, and this is that, so we look after each other and the place. And in looking after the place, there's an element of housing, obviously housing our neighbors and keeping our neighbors from displacement. But it's also this imagining the place through the importance of commercial. So Kensington Market it's well known as this place to go to because it has this very strong community, but it also has independent businesses. There's no big chains there, and it's been a very it's this crossroads of waves and waves and waves of immigration that have come and left something there. But those businesses become almost their cultural centers in some way. And the displacement of those businesses is preventing that is so key to looking after the place. And so what I wish that I had known, or I think collectively we might have worked on more, is just how complicated the commercial side of things is. Finding the right tenant at the right time. It involves so much organizing, but organizing in a very different kind of way. There's an element of outreach. There's thinking about what's there now, what needs to be, how we can strengthen what's there now. But the chances of finding the right tenant at the right moment really involves, I think, creating a kind of a pipeline, which means relationships with other organizations that are incubating businesses, thinking about what co-ops are doing. This idea of it's really who's there, who wants to be there, how do we bring that in, what's the needs of the community. So this very much this kind of analysis of where we are and where we want to be. So collectively thinking that through. And we did because we're talking about research is really important. And there's a report that came out that where we looked at, or we created the report with student researchers and collective community input about how we can consider that looking after the place as placekeeping, and what that how that can happen. And to the point we just made, what was really interesting when so we published the report and recommendations in terms of policy, because the city, we always talk about the cities. In the case of Ontario, it's very much because there's an absence of, I mean, I think we should start to say that we have an utterly corrupt kleptocracy in Ontario at the provincial level. So there isn't really much hope for policy change at that level. But we can, cities are seeing this effect of the monoculture that is coming to our main streets. And so how do we prevent that kind of displacement, which is ultimately it's keeping that place. It's the relationship between the people that live there and what they need and where they need to buy, and those places that are almost they're cultural anchors. And it's so important to keep those, but it's also really important. So there's a legacy aspect of how do we bring that into the future? How do we think about employment? How do we think about thinking through the land trust as a very much a protector of place? We're rooted. Kensington Market is really tiny, and we are very much rooted in this place and in this neighborhood. These problems are, they're very broad, and they're happening in all other communities. So in some sense, when you're finding a solution, when you're really analyzing your own location, what you need here, what can be done, you very much end up in these kinds of coalitions because these problems are across neighborhoods. But having that deep understanding of what your community needs allows you to then join really productively with your neighbors and other neighborhoods to create policies, to advocate for policies, but also to create the environment where those policies can actually be enacted. So I don't know if that's really an answer to the
great.
question,
That's
but
brilliant.
that's.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This word that kept coming through with what you were saying, placekeeping, you said it, and it's so right, and even the idea of what research is, like research means it can mean something very different in terms of what facts, what truth, what things are gathered about placekeeping. I could talk to all of you all day, but we're going to move on around the corner from Dominique to Toronto's Chinatown neighborhood to talk to Chi about the Toronto Chinatown Land Trust, which just came into being last year. So I want to ask you a little bit about your first year as a land trust. What are the goals behind the Toronto Chinatown Land Trust? And have these goals been shaped by the research that you're doing, the placekeeping that you're doing in Toronto's Chinatown?
Hi. Hands up if you've been to Toronto's Chinatown. Yay. Okay, so I don't need to give our whole backstory, I think. And if you haven't been to mine, you've been to a Chinatown somewhere in the world, I assume. What to say? Well, yes, we've technically existed on paper much shorter, but the organizing towards incorporating was a working group out of a really rad abolitionist neighborhood organizing group called Friends of Chinatown, which organized, I say they're abolitionist in the classical sense in that we were organizing against the police, against surveillance cameras in public spaces, against people being evicted through violent manners, and against veggie grannies who were vending on the curbside who were getting kicked off of the curb by enforcement officers. And we wanted to do that in solidarity, obviously, with a lot of Black organizing leadership that was really teaching us a lot of these methods to try and do that cultural borrowing to each other. And so what would a land trust look like coming out of that politic is that they were fighting. If you're fighting the police, fighting the man, fighting the system, but everything is fighting and fighting and fighting and reacting and coming from this really exhausting emotional space that was not sustainable. And someone met Cooney. At some point, this is before I moved to Toronto, this story. So someone met Dominique because this is before CLT existed, and Dominique at the time, in and amongst instigating 100 things with Kevin and other people who were in the room, someone met you guys because the Walmart fight was happening. A Walmart was going to come to Kensington Market. Can you imagine? So off-brand, such a bad vibe. No self-awareness that it was not a good fit. So that felt aligned. And so there were these lessons learned from may I call you an OG neighborhood organizer?
Yes. Yes.
Teaching the youths, being you're not the first ones to try and organize some, anti-capitalist shit in the neighborhood. Come listen to some lessons. And then they get introduced to Josh and Cooney who were instigating things in Parkdale. And Cooney, there is one question you asked that I think made such a lasting impression that it was conveyed multiple times over to when I joined the project, which is that I think you were asked by David Pinkett a version of this question, and you asked and worded it differently. But in summary, it is, okay, instead of fighting all the time, what are you going to build? Because in the end, like, that's not a renewable resource. Like the emotional bank that fighting comes from, to fight for rezoning, to fight for a city policy, to fight to Jess, don't laugh at me. Jessica from Montreal Chinatown is just like, I feel tired, girl. Like, I can see this eye contact. You have to give community and each other's friendships, being in those meetings all the time, going to these consultations that are insulting and belittling, explaining your story over and over and over again about what was stolen, about, you know, like the solidarity that has made it possible for you to show up. That's not a renewable source of energy emotionally for your collective. But building and imagining and dreaming is. And the people who get to do speculative exercises in real estate and in capitalism are like developers. Like I went to urban planning school. Cooney taught me. Like all four of these people are my direct teachers. I wish I could have taken your classes, Maggie. But Maggie and I now you get to be my teacher through doing a research project together. And you realize that the people who get to write speculative fiction every day, to draw maps and renderings and new drawings of what could be built, are people that are doing that for the sake of making more money, when we could repurpose those tools. We could be the ones hiring architects. Imagine if the veggie grannies could be in charge of bossing around a group of architects to build them their dream, you know, whatever situation. The students I'm teaching in university today crave that job. Like, it's not like we go to policy school, go into research, go into any of the professions we end up doing because we wanted to fuel capitalism. Fundamentally, we wanted to build nice things. The definition of nice just really needs to be accountable to community. And I think, like, increasingly, like as I hear you guys come across to me, I felt like there were a lot of implied assumptions that if you guys didn't know the back of that story of why Josh needed to say introducing the idea of acquisitions was groundbreaking, because the norm at the time, you could not talk to someone in a policy or legislative space that was not talking about supply. The assumption was that the only way to achieve affordable housing was new supply. And so even to get the word acquire existing, that there was a leaky bucket, a term that literally this research report introduced into the Canadian nomenclature of how we talk about housing, came from this community organized research. Shout out to Tendon again. Woo! Right? Like there was this assumption that it broke. And like the shift to emphasizing placekeeping comes from a whole host of different place-based, you know, urbanism networks who are just like, the word place making is bullshit. Like there's literally no definition of this. And a lot of place making projects are like, I don't know, public furniture projects that pop up for a summer, and they place make a random parking lot, or like they place make Times Square. Like that's probably the biggest poster child of it. And you like, it's a colonizer energy of like, there was nothing here. There is a waste bare land that I can project my like urbanist fantasies into how we interact with this peculiar form of urban space. And instead, there are tons of people who are already caretaking and living around and adapting to and utilizing, even as hostile as it may seem, spaces. And so then therefore placekeeping again is in contrast to another part of like the norm of the narrative that's like implied, and is reason why that is groundbreaking. I think the other thing is like this housing versus commercial, which Dominique and I are lucky to be able to talk to each other about all the time. But I remember in one maybe more facetious conversation, I came up with a new theory, which is that the working class invented mixed use. Poor people invented so-called mixed-use urbanist fantasies of 15-minute walkable complete communities, blah, 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 blah. Like whatever the going trend is from some housing policy nerd that wants to talk you up about everything they just learned about in school, and there's so much enthusiasm. In the end, it's like, yeah, house shops. Like I get my nails done, not right now, but like I've gotten my nails done in some crazy situations where I've gone through a lobby to get through a flight of stairs to get to someone's condo that they've sublet, and I'm doing it in her like room because that's where she runs her business. But people have done this over and over and over again, whether it's your nail lady, whether it's turning your living room into a famous cheese shop a la Kensington Market. The idea of like, who cares about the rules? Who cares about zoning? Who cares about whether we are in silos of like housing, etc.? The idea is that you gotta live, like you have to survive. And so that energy has been really fueling like Chinatown's understanding. And it's because we've been able to leapfrog and build on these stories and these like shared learnings. Like we either talk about you guys as like our greenhouses, or I think we talk about you guys mostly as our big sisters. But looking ahead to the next phase, we were able to host successfully our first AGM, which would have appointed our interim board of all the people who formed that original working group. These like rad organizers who were like, I would say mostly younger, we're mostly under 40, and we really wanted to diversify our like age range in terms of who was in governance positions. We're also like, we went super viral for fighting developers on Instagram originally. And now that Friends of Chinatown, the grassroots group that is still organizing on the ground, still door knocking, winning back stolen tips and wages from bad bosses in our neighborhood, and also knocking on doors to get tenants organized, they're continuing to do that work. Meanwhile, we have formalized and kind of separated and created this partnership structure. And now the like grassroots group that incubated the land trust are wholly independent. So that was also a huge, but like required a lot of like, what is our conflict policy in the future going to be? We are going to be in conflict with each other. It is a fundamental contradiction that we have birthed an organization that will be a landlord when we came from an anti-landlord organizing group. We came from like radical solidarity with Indigenous land back. And what are we saying? We're going to become landlords on stolen land together, except differently? Is that the fantasy? So all of these seemed like really obvious question marks, and we didn't want to shy away from them. And we were like, okay, we are in a really lucky position to be able to learn from all of the examples that being in the network actively and participating in these lessons have offered us. And we get to ask the next set of fascinating questions about like, what does this change about our assumptions about governance? Well, how does it unsettle our commons? How do we not like contribute to settler futurity by just like creating more settler cults where we like escape out of the system by providing affordable housing for ourselves, and instead like actively erode and give back to the movement for like collective freedom from this system? And what would it look like one day where we are able to convince our own community that feels like it has been so hard fought that Chinatown was entirely erased from the map and had to completely relocate itself? Toronto has a rare Chinatown where it's no longer in its historic location. And for us to have a conversation with our own stakeholders in Chinatown, some of which are very patriarchal, some of which are like think about the clan fathers in their ancestral halls lighting incense and telling us that we don't know what we're doing. These are the kinds of conversations we're navigating all the time internally to get our own houses in order, to be like, what would it look like to truly, truly build trust and relationships with land back organizers in order for us to go after projects together in this radical, dreamy future where we get to, piece by piece, take bits of land away from the capitalist system, decommodify it first, hold it in the interim, so that the community can do even more dreamy and radical things with it in the future, a future that we don't know what it will look like, but we're extremely excited for. And we're wrapping up our first strategic plan now. There were 3 prongs. One was building an anti-colonial framework, which would create an evaluation process for all of our work moving forward that is deeply informed by relationships and learnings that we have that need to be accountable to the land as a relative, to actually think about what deep accountability to each other in a way that actually honors the dish with one spoon would look like. Not that we were invited to be a part of that agreement, but since we are here, there is natural law to be followed. What would that look like without it being like cultural appropriation of Indigenous knowledge? What would that look like with us actually fueling more energy toward that capacity? And we've gotten to a huge place where we might almost be ready with our first version of that framework, which we'll be excited to debut to our own community first. And then maybe by the next summit, we might be ready to share. And the other 2 prongs are more predictable. They're like, get ready to steward and build our base. But that's where we're at. And in the next 6 months, we are about to go through the first daunting kind of board turnover story, where you have like your original founders and everyone has either stepped down and is working on the project like me, or is just like moving on because people are having kids, people are, you know, like life changes. And it's been 3 years of the formal on paper version and 5 years before that in the organizing volunteer version. So we've like had 8 seats open for potential people to be elected. That's the majority of the board. That sounded terrifying originally because we were like, what if it's people who don't know anything about the story and won't be values aligned at all? And then we just like radical trust, like threw that out there on Instagram, started doing outreach in the community, and we thought no one was going to run for our board. And 13 people are currently signed up, 3 Gaysians, 4 genderqueers, like, you know, like 2 people who are just like matriarchs in the Chinese head tax redress movement as well. And to see like elders and very, very young youth all be willing to step up, even though they're the least likely people to self-identify to step forward, that's been a huge exciting thing for us to look forward to this fall. I feel like I was talking for a long
That's
time, but thank you
incredible.
guys for listening.
Thank you
That's
so
sad.
much. Thank you so much, Chi. I'm going to open it up for questions in a moment, but first I want to turn to Maggie. So, you know, we're unpacking here community and land and trust, you know, and in the 4 walls of the law school, trust means a certain thing. It's like a legal thing. But Maggie, I want to talk to you a little bit about trust, and the fact that no matter how you look at it, this is stolen land that we're talking about, wherever we're talking about CLTs being. And these are imposed legal structures that have never had the interests of Indigenous peoples or any peoples who have different understandings of what community and belonging and value are. So I want to ask you about the work that you're doing on Indigenous-led land use and the role of CLTs in that. But more importantly, I want to ask you about how to do this work in a good way. How can current CLTs work in a good way with Indigenous peoples and communities?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Alex. I just want to start off by saying what an honor it is to be here on Mi'kmaq territory and to be here with these amazing panelists. Just listening to you speak, I'm like even more like, yeah, like it's so amazing. And all of you in the room, there's so many people in this room. And so thank you so much for spending your time with us. And Alex, of course, having you moderate this discussion. Thank you so much. I'm just feeling like so much gratitude. I feel like it's like beaming. So I just wanted to say that, and yes, thank you so much for your questions, Alex. And just to add kind of another layer to what we've been talking about. So for the research paper that I wrote, I had the great privilege of talking to many Indigenous folks, Indigenous scholars, practitioners, housing practitioners that were working to either like within Indigenous community land trusts or that were trying to start Indigenous community land trusts across Canada. And there's just such incredible, this is just scratching the surface. The report that is just truly just scratching the surface of the amazing work that's going on, in addition to all the amazing work that's going on in community land trusts across the country. And one thing that I learned is that there are many things, but there's so much to learn from Indigenous wisdom and how that can support community land trusts and the people working in them so hard. And learned that land, the concept of land stewardship, it means so many things. And it can mean, like land stewardship in general can mean, place-based ecological restoration. It means ensuring stable, secure, culturally appropriate housing for Indigenous folks. It can mean food sovereignty, general well-being, and it should, I would say, support, meaning putting the power back into the hands of Indigenous women, Two-Spirit folks, and Indigenous youth. And so these themes came out like so strongly in my research. So I just wanted to start off with like kind of that like framing and like definition land stewardship. So what I think that CLTs can offer, at least for now, and CLTs are amazing. They're not perfect, but what's perfect? But CLTs can offer a very viable model or framework for Indigenous nations and communities to move forward their goals related to land and to land stewardship. And the goal is, and the hope is, land back, of course, because in many ways CLTs align so closely with Indigenous values and principles, knowing that there are many Indigenous worldviews and values and principles. And just merely, I mean, I could go into that, but just merely from the fact that CLTs are a departure from thinking about land as a commodity, that land is not supposed to be commodified and we're not supposed to be making billions of dollars off of it. It gets us closer to the idea, and something that I hold true, that we all have relationships and responsibilities to the land. The land is how we live. It's how we sustain ourselves. So we have responsibilities to take care of it. And so I think the CLT model kind of gets at that. So it helps us recognize our and live out our responsibilities. And just to give an example, and actually the word acquisition, it's interesting in my notes, the notes that I was making, truthfully on the plane yesterday as I was flying here from Vancouver, is that so something that an example that really stood out to me from the amazing folks that I got to talk to produce this report is that, so when you think about CLTs, you think about what an Indigenous CLT could look like, the themes. What would it mean if, you were to acquire land, CLT was to have, the Indigenous CLT was to have the funding that they needed and through the entire project, leading to what Dr. Lynn was saying this morning. Acquiring land and setting up a land trust in an urban area that prioritizes actually the healing of the land itself, the healing of the landscape first. And then actually, once you have that, looking to what the built environment looks like, and where the buildings sit in the infrastructure. So in other words, building the buildings around the land and the healing of the land, and putting that spirit of the land first. So just to add another dimension to all of the incredible work that CLTs do. And then quickly, I'll just say, one of the questions was, what can CLTs do, to work in a good way with Indigenous folks? And I think there's incredible work going on, incredible solidarity work going on. But one of the things that I know this work is happening, but just for CLTs to work on their internal processes and policies first, to work to make them more inclusive, more respectful, as least racist as possible, to basically make them as decolonial as possible. Do that work first, though, that internal work, before necessarily asking Indigenous folks to be on your board or to be to be part. That work needs to happen. It's not to say that relationship building and that trust building can't happen while that work is being done. Absolutely it can, but I think, that would be my kind of takeaway on what CLTs can do. The other things I think are a little bit more practical and that we're living out, CLTs are and can lead really innovative spaces for knowledge exchange and training. So a lot of Indigenous folks that are really wanting to use the CLT model for all it's worth to get their land back, they have so much wisdom to offer, but they're also craving a lot of the wisdom that you all have on this panel, that you have in this room. So CLTs can actually cultivate those spaces for that knowledge exchange. And I've had the great privilege of seeing that, of being helping to facilitate those spaces, along with the Toronto Chinatown Land Trust this summer, which was just incredible to be part of. Shout out. And I would say the work that she's doing, that you're doing, at the Chinatown Land Trust is groundbreaking in terms of working in solidarity with land back defenders. So what you're doing is what the other CLT should be doing as well, if you can. So yeah, so thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you. I have another question, but I want to open it up to folks in the room. This is like an amazing group of people to ask questions of. Hope you'll see them over the next couple of days, few days anyway. But does anyone have any questions about, can be about anything, but if there's a connection to research, just because it's in the name of the panel, it doesn't have to be, but you know, yeah, okay. See a couple of questions back there.
Oh, it's already on. Oh, hello. Hi, it's me again. Yeah, I'm Edith. I'm from the Hamilton Community Land Trust. We've done some research projects too. I guess my question is, and this is a really potentially elementary question, but how many emails is too many emails to a member of government to tell them that they should do something? You know, like, how exactly do you make that research known to the people who are actually going to change the policy without annoying them to the point where they never want to speak with you ever again? Because I find that, like, I get to a point where it's like, okay, I've told them now, I have sent the email. Now what? That's my question.
That is such a great question. I might turn to Cooney and to Josh first, but I think anybody here could answer that question. So I don't know. Do you want to go first, Chi?
There's never too many emails. Go for it.
Well, if I were to be honest, like you can't just do the email only, right? I was thinking back as you were asking the question, like, what's the most productive thing to share? She's right that when we released the rooming house study, and we like, it wasn't only that everyone else, including the nonprofit sector, wasn't particularly interested in buying old buildings, because they were going to be challenging to run and improve, right? But also, even in our community, like progressive people weren't on board to like save rooming houses, because like even progressive people in our community historically like had critiques or biases about who lived there and whether it was good housing, et cetera. And so the proposition to like that we should save this challenging form of housing was complex for people to absorb. And so it wasn't something we could just send an email and then get like a good response from a politician, because we didn't even have support in our community. So we had to start first by building support in our community and in the media, like the general public and community members who need to be on board, and then also find allies in the government level, in the governments you want to engage with. Like you don't go. We didn't go straight to our counselor, like for example, even though he's the one who needed to put forward a motion at council to get a program and funding. We first started with like the bureaucrats who were dealing with the challenges on the ground, who we thought might be allies. And you find those allies. Sometimes it takes a little time, but the most important thing that we did that I think led to our success around that policy change was that we brought together a bunch of bureaucrats who were dealing with challenges with rooming houses, and also with the influx of folks into the shelter system from rooming house evictions. And we shared our research, and they found that there was a lot of alignment in what we were documenting and what they were having challenges with at a municipal scale. And we built some like good relationships with municipal staff who were dealing with the issues already. And then we eventually got the support of our local counselor who happens to like working with city staff on hard problems. So it just like, it takes a bit of time to get to that point where you get to the right decision maker, but you have to do that work to find your allies and build the support in your community to make sure that like the demand you're bringing forth is also just like has support. And if you can't get support in your community, it's possible it's not the right solution too, right? You have to build that support. Yeah, I mean, that's what I can say.
Well, I think I'm just going to reiterate what Josh has said. Sometimes we just have to do what we said in a research report. and then show this is what we like to do, and then get people, those in power, get involved. So what we need to do is not to just think about, planning strategies or alternative strategies, but also we need to come up with political strategies, medias, forums, working source, many different ways that we can propose and expose, and many different things that we said in the research reports. So sometimes we have to do.
I would say as well, I wouldn't have any fear of annoying any political figures. And in Kensington, we've been it was almost like a 360 relationship with our elected officials. But one thing that we did do, I'll just add, is like, so the city is supposed to do something, and we're waiting, and we just go, fuck, we're just going to do it ourselves, and then just say to the city councilor, hey, we're doing this. If you want to come, and that puts enormous pressure. Like, it's not a great thing to do. It puts, if you do have those relationships, but it will accelerate things. And the other thing.
Yeah, definitely. I thought of the parking lot too. Say the parking lot story.
Oh, okay.
That's such a good example.
Okay, I'll
Parking lot
like-
story coming up.
Yeah, I know, but okay. So, yes, okay, I'll tell the parking lot story. So we have a parking lot. One of my mentors, Dave Pincus, it was the fight that had been lost by our elders because it was housing and it turned into parking lot. And so we were in San Francisco, which is the forest of activism. Anyway, and I went up to one of the New York activists and I said, how do you get the city to give us the parking lot for housing? And they're like, you don't ask the city, you take it. So then we had various ideas. We'd like have a big sign that said future home of the Kensington Market Community Land Trust housing. We just have a big sign there. And the best activist activity that we ever had, it didn't happen, which makes it perfect because it was imaginary. But we were just like, we'd have all these, we were gonna have like a community sleep out with like tents that looked like cars, and it was the war on the car election. And so we were going to do this, and our city councilor was like, no, please don't do that. And so they passed a motion, and this is years ago. They passed a motion to work with the Kensington Market Community Land Trust to look at how we could use the parking lot for housing. And then we waited and we waited and we waited and we waited, and then one of our mayor had an we describe it as an inappropriate relationship, but anyway, our mayor was corrupt. I don't know. It's not like I'll talk about that way. And then he left, and then we got a new mayor, and now we are the housing is being built. We're building. The city decided to be the developer, but there's 78 units of deeply affordable housing that are being built, and that we will, with our partner St. Clair's, look after. So sometimes you can also seize a moment. Like, one of the things I think, like, there are just these moments where there's visibility or vulnerability, or there's just a number of things, and if you can find that and even just threaten to do something, that can be really useful. But you do eventually. What's astonishing to me as well, when it started to go back to, like, city planning had no idea about, like, Kensington was just like, let's just build a mall, or like, there was just no idea. And we brought the planning, we brought the chief planner in, we brought the planning staff in to start to understand. And the evolution now of like finding those punks within like those, there's some in banks, there's some everywhere. There's somebody that's working that really, wants to do something else. And you can find those and push them. But certainly the whole relationship, I think, through this sort of work has changed radically.
Well, Chi, do you want to add too? Because you're probably currently sending emails.
So there's a Chinatown area study. There's never been a single City of Toronto policy document that has ever said the word Chinatown before. It's literally not a word that has ever been in use. And yet they use photos of Chinatown in their downtown growth plan, in their retail design strategy plan, to show how, like, small storefronts are attractive for animating the vibe of the street, like whatever, insert annoying urban planning term in front of it. So this continued use, and Kensington Market is a poster child of like the heritage. Look at the heritage of our fantastic walkable city, you know. So you have to cash in on this nostalgia capitalism is what we've started coining. We're shopping that out. We're seeing how it
Yeah.
resonates.
Yeah.
And someone else said to me, like, politicians are there for us to use. And it's especially dangerous, and I'm saying this mainly to the white people in the room. It's especially hard when we are developing parasocial relationships with progressive politicians because we imagine ourselves also to be progressives. And then you're watching them on TikTok to do like get ready with me videos. And especially when I'm talking to younger generations of organizers, it's like in the electoral politics system, politicians are there for you to use. Like, do not, because they were friendly to you, because they remembered your name at an event, because they hugged you once, and they seem very important, let them not follow up with concrete actions. Make them pass a council motion in your organization's favor. Ask for money, ask for funding, and keep asking until they actually give it to you. Don't like, they'll be like, yes, and like they'll say nice things in meetings, but do not relent and do not believe it until you see it. That is like a hard lesson from Chinatown. And right now we are asking ourselves the same questions, and none of it is going to be email based, like back to your point, as much as there are emails. It is like the broader issue. I think Josh said to me this once at a party where we were also like, how do we get the attention of XYZ city councilor? Because we want to get this site, because we want to, I don't know, whatever. And I think you said to me, they can't hold it in their brains. Their job is impossible. They represent too many people, first of all, proportionately to what is actually a good governance system. And so they can't hold your specific story alive in their attention span. So you can't come to them with just a description of the issue or the problem. They can't be a solution provider. They can be a convener, and they can be a champion of the solution you are proposing. But the problem with solutions is that it requires imagination. And I was in a Dara Kelly workshop. Dara Kelly is a Coast Salish professor of business out in Vancouver. And she said to me, the first thing that capitalism destroys is your imagination. It is impossible for you and your collective to come up with a proposal or a solution if you yourselves have not healed your relationship to basic imagination as a muscle. And this is a story that we are telling ourselves and training ourselves to do in Chinatown, to be like, if we can't reclaim our own ability to do fiction that can become real, we don't have a proposal to bring to their office for them to even champion, even in a partial sense. And so I think like the rooming house study, back to like the concrete pilot, it's like, we're just gonna build a model where we buy one house and it has 12 units. So then they can even just hold it in their brains of like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Oh, but now I can picture it in my mind. You're saying you're gonna own one rooming house. Oh, now I can imagine the community owning 50 rooming house. Like it literally is, sometimes it's not even like malicious. It's just, we don't have this muscle living under capitalism. That's the proposal. Sorry, I went a bit far there.
Thank you so much.
Rest of
It's
the
a
vibe.
perfect place to end. I'm sorry our time together has come to a close.